When the new CEO, Evan Blake, called me into his office, I already knew something was coming. The man had been in charge for barely a week, but he carried himself like he owned the place. I'd been working at Dawson Enterprises for nearly 12 years, long enough to survive 3 leadership changes, 2 economic crises, and 1,000 empty promises. But that morning, Evan's tone was colder than usual. He leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and said, "I'll keep this short, Daniel. Your position is no longer necessary. We're restructuring." I didn't argue. I didn't even blink. He looked disappointed, like he wanted a reaction. "I know you've been here a while," he continued, "but this company needs a new direction. Fresh blood. Energy." His smirk widened. "You'll get your severance by the end of the day." I nodded. "Thank you for letting me know." Then I stood, shook his hand, and walked out. He watched me, probably wondering why I wasn't begging for my job. What he didn't know was that 2 days earlier, I had finalized the purchase of a controlling interest in Dawson Enterprises through a quiet deal with one of the retiring board members. Evan was technically my employee. He just didn't realize it yet. When I left the building that day, I didn't even feel anger, just calm anticipation. I knew the board meeting scheduled for Friday would be interesting. Friday came quickly. The executive conference room buzzed with chatter as directors filed in. Evan sat at the head of the table, his new assistant by his side, looking proud and overconfident. "Good morning, everyone," he said. "Before we begin, I'd like to discuss a few leadership changes I've implemented." "Actually," interrupted Margaret, one of the senior board members, "we'll start with the ownership update first." "There's been a change." Evan frowned. "Ownership update?" The doors opened. I walked in. The room fell silent. Evan's expression twisted in confusion, then irritation. "What's he doing here?" he asked sharply. Margaret smiled faintly. "Allow me to introduce our new majority shareholder, Mr. Daniel Reed." You could have heard a pin drop. Evan's face drained of color. "What?" he stammered. I took my seat at the head of the table, his seat, and placed my folder down. "2 days before you fired me," I said calmly, "I completed a private deal with Mr. Collins, who owned 40% of this company. Combined with my existing shares, that makes me the majority owner." Evan blinked, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't quite process it. You can't just." "I can," I said evenly, and I did. The board members exchanged glances, some trying to hide their smiles. "Now," I continued, "let's discuss your recent management decisions. I see you've made quite a few staffing changes." Evan tried to recover, straightening his tie. I was acting in the best interest of the company. I leaned back in the chair, the same one he had fired me from days earlier, and said, "I agree. So in that same spirit, I'll be making a change too." His jaw tightened. "What kind of change?" I met his eyes and said quietly, "You're relieved of your duties as CEO. Effective immediately." He shot up from his chair. "You can't fire me." I smiled faintly. "That's what you told me. But the difference is, I own this company." He looked around the table, searching for support, but no one spoke. Even his assistant avoided eye contact. Finally, Margaret said, "You should clear your desk, Mr. Blake." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The room stayed silent for a few seconds, and then a quiet chuckle rippled through the table. I turned to the board and said, "Now, where were we? Let's talk about rebuilding Dawson Enterprises the right way." That afternoon, I walked into my old office, sunlight streaming across the desk I once thought I'd never see again. But this time, it wasn't my workplace. It was my company. And as I looked out at the skyline, I smiled. Some lessons don't need to be taught with anger, just with timing.